I want to talk a little bit more today about these skills, these concepts, these principles around thinking better and how they apply to kids. I talked in a recent video about my son learning about the US Constitution and trying to teach him the nuance in that, the complexity of how amazing the document was and the thought that went into it and how it was, truly revolutionary in terms of how governments were designed and to give freedoms and liberties to the people and to govern yourselves and all those things. But at the same time, it was a huge miss when it came to slavery and how black people were treated and how women were treated. And we should be able to acknowledge that. And even for my son, who's 7 years old and in second grade, I think it's important that you teach that nuance and complexity, not the same way you would teach it to a 17-year-old or a 27-year-old, but you give it its appropriate due. You don't hide from it. You don't brush it under the rug. You don't assume that they can't handle it or that they're better off learning it in a simpler way. I think the principle of never sacrificing truth for simplicity still has to hold in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, 12th grade, and throughout our lives. And I want to stress that point of doing that with children, doing that with kids, and doing it from a position of, the way I've been thinking about it is you're arming them, you're giving them the tools they need, because I'm thinking more and more that just human nature, fundamentally, our minds are flawed. They don't work the optimal way they should when it comes to very complex, nuanced topics like that, like American history. And this thought that if you don't actively give them tools to account for those flaws, that they'll be okay and we'll be okay as a society, I don't believe that's true. I think what we see happening in the world today is a direct example of that. And I think you can look out throughout human history and you see that. There's constant conflict, there's constant disagreement. And somebody might say, well, yes, that is human nature, and you'll never get rid of that. Maybe that's true. But I want to try and kind of understand, as I always do, the logic behind it, because there is some logic. Why is that human nature? And what I would say, and I think it's supported, it's not a novel idea, but the way our minds function, these flaws that I speak of in our mind, they're there for an evolutionary purpose, right? We like to think of us as really sophisticated, advanced animals. But in many ways, we're not that far removed from when we were living out, in the woods or in the jungle or wherever it was with animals, thinking very basically like they would of, I just need to eat and I need to procreate and I need to do the basic things in life. Obviously, for various reasons, we've evolved and our minds have gotten bigger and our capacity to think has expanded. But that doesn't mean the wiring, the functioning of our minds kept up with that in the same rate and pace. It doesn't mean our ability to understand complex, nuanced topics is where it needs to be. And I think that's what those flaws are, right? I call them flaws, but they're really the shadow side, if you will, of evolutionary things that have developed, right? The ability to function in a society this complex, this big, this interconnected with everything that goes on in the world today with technology and governments and politics, etc., our minds just aren't there yet. They have not caught up. So when it comes to topics like social issues or politics, we are simple-minded in that. We still, at our base level in our minds, still think very much like we did when it was just hunt, eat, procreate, etc. We try our best, and certainly there's exceptions of people that are able to break through that and think much deeper and be better. But myself and society as a whole, I believe, at aggregate, we're just not there yet. So I bring that back to kids and why it's so important to arm them and give them the tools. They fall into that category. So they, from the beginning of life, once they start thinking and interacting with these complex thoughts and topics, they're not equipped to handle it, just like most of us aren't. And you go through your life that way and you don't account for it. And it just gets stronger. Those flaws turn into biases. Those biases turn into identity issues and deep-rooted beliefs that we hold and we protect so dearly. And you have the issues that you see today. So again, somebody might say, well, why do you need to teach a 7-year-old about the nuance of slavery and the Constitution and what freedom really meant? Well, for that reason, for that exact reason, because it almost becomes a self-fulfilling thing where you don't teach them the complexity. You teach them that it's simple. It's simple. America's great. Everything's perfect. Or vice versa, right? America's a disaster. It was built on slavery. It's the worst thing we've ever done. Either of those are too simple. And you're teaching them that's how you should think. Just think simply. Just think in, to some extent, extreme ends. Don't worry about nuance. Don't worry about complexity. It's not important. Bullshit. It's absolutely important. It's more important than any math, than any social studies, than any science. You could make an argument that we teach them at an early age. The number one thing we need to teach them first is how to think. and how to process these complex thoughts, because that will dictate everything else. All the other stuff is add-ons that's super valuable and can be super helpful. But if you don't know how to use it, if you don't know how to direct it effectively, objectively, rationally, logically, it means nothing. So we have to give them those tools up front. We have to allow them, as I said in prior videos, a fighting chance to protect themselves against the flaws of the mind, and to approach these topics with the due complexity and nuance it deserves, so that we can avoid the situation we're in now and in many ways throughout human history, where it's just Yankees versus Red Sox, tribe versus tribe, right? Your side versus my side. Let's make it where we think better, we think deeper.